The movie begins in 1926 as a 10-year-old girl named Catherine solves complex math problems in her school. The school's principal is very impressed by her abilities, and he advises her parents that they should put her in a better school, which will help her succeed in life. During this era, racism against the Black was at its peak in America, and they were alienated in all areas of life, and even public places like restrooms, hospitals, and schools were designed keeping this in mind. The Black community didn't have as many opportunities as their white counterparts. The story moves forward by 35 years, and in 1961, Catherine is seen traveling in a car with her two friends, Dorothy and Mary. While driving, suddenly their car stops working, and there is no sign of anyone who they can ask for help. Dorothy is skilled in repairing it, but just as she is about to fix it, a police officer shows up. In that time period, Black people were viewed with great suspicion, and they weren't allowed to stop on the road. Mary explains to the officer that all three of them work at NASA, and their job is crucial to the American rocket launch, and if they are late, the mission will not be possible. This changes the officer's views of them, and he starts talking to them with respect and even offers to escort them to their office. Initially, they are reluctant to accept this offer, but then they decide to accept it, and they fully enjoy this unforgivable experience. At the NASA headquarters, several government officers watch the news about Russia's rocket launch, which frustrates the presidential envoy, and they order NASA's head, Harrison, to rush their project as they must also launch a rocket soon. At the Langley Research Center of NASA, only Black ladies are employed, and this includes Dorothy, who although works as a supervisor, she is not an official one. She gets paid the same as other employees, and even does her job very well. And one day her boss, Mitchell, comes and asks her to move to the research division, where she will be working under Professor Harrison. Mitchell leaves after sharing this news, but Dorothy rushes after her. She requests that since she is doing so much work, she should be rewarded with a promotion to an official supervisor, but Mitchell puts her in her place, and even threatens to fire her if she keeps asking for it. On the other hand, Mary's bosses are confused as to why the rockets can't handle the Earth's atmosphere. Since Mary secretly dreams of becoming an engineer one day, she uses her knowledge to explain the problems which impress her superiors. Her boss tells her that she should apply to be an engineer at NASA, and this makes her very happy. Meanwhile, Catherine has joined her new workplace, where she meets her new boss, Harrison, who asks her if she has what it takes to solve complex computational problems. She enthusiastically replies yes, and to test her claim, he gives her a task asking her to check her colleague, Paul's work. While going through the bundles of files, Catherine suddenly feels the urge to use the restroom, but she soon discovers that there is none for colored people, since this place only has white employees. She searches the entire building, and after failing in her attempt, she runs almost a kilometer to her old office, where only Black women are employed. She relieves herself, but even during this time, she doesn't stop working, showing her dedication to her job. Later, she returns to her office, but since she has been gone for a long time, all her colleagues look at her with suspicious eyes. Catherine has 3 daughters, but she takes care of her family on her own since her husband and father have died. But luckily, she has her mother who offers her support in taking care of the children. One day, Catherine's friends, Dorothy and Mary, try to set up a date for Catherine with a man named Jim. Catherine is not interested in dating since she is fully committed to her work and has no time for love, but Dorothy and Mary leave, leaving Catherine alone with Jim. During their conversation, Jim expresses his shock since he never thought that NASA would hire a Black woman, and his views upset Catherine. She tells him that NASA hired her because she was the first Black student to receive a scholarship to one of the best universities in Virginia, which justifies her qualification. After expressing her anger, Catherine leaves while Jim regrets his comment. The following day at Catherine's office, as she's about to have some coffee, she notices there are 2 different pots, out of which has specifically been labeled for colored people. She feels hurt, but stays quiet on this racist attitude. Catherine's superior, Paul hands her a file and asks her to recheck the data, but Catherine notes that most of the info has been cut off, and she won't be able to make sense of this. Paul addresses her concern by saying that this is just dummy data, and they have already done most of the work. After struggling for some time, Catherine gets an idea, and she uses the bulb's light to read the scribbled data. Soon she realizes that the data in her file is the same as the one on the whiteboard, so she decides to solve the formula on the whiteboard. After finishing this, she goes to the restroom in her old workplace. While she is gone, Harrison, Paul, and others see her calculations, and they are amazed by her progress. They recognize her abilities because she solved a very complex formula, which they had been struggling with for a long time, but she finishes it in just a few minutes. As Catherine returns to her workplace, she is called into Harrison's office, who questions her how she was able to solve the formula, although they had retracted most of the information. Catherine tries to explain herself, but Harrison feels suspicious due to the current foreign situation and asks if she is a Russian spy. His secretary clarifies that Catherine is not Russian, as they have already conducted enough investigation into her background. He feels impressed by her abilities and instructs Paul that from now on, he should provide Catherine with all the data so their project can be completed soon. Mary had applied for the position of engineer at NASA, but she is told that since she hadn't graduated from a university, she couldn't get the position. Mary feels hurt, but tries to figure out how she can be admitted to the university, where only white people are allowed. One day, Catherine meets Jim at a party, where he apologizes for spoiling their first meeting, and he invites her for a dance. However, their romantic moment is disturbed as during the dance, they hear the radio, which states that Russia has successfully launched a rocket into space, winning the competition against America, shocking everyone. Due to Russia's successful mission, pressure increases on NASA, and Harrison announces that they must work twice as hard as before until their rocket project is successful. Unfortunately, despite multiple attempts, their rockets keep failing, which frustrates NASA engineers. To make their calculations more precise, NASA got an automatic calculating machine, IBM, but unfortunately, no one was trained on how to use it. At night, Dorothy sneaks into the office and she learns how to operate the machine. The next morning, she explains it to all the black women, and soon they all know how to operate it. She explains to all her fellow black ladies that the computer might replace the job of black accountants, which worries them. On the other hand, Mary tries to get admission in the university, but since they never had any black students, she seeks the court's permission. Catherine's boss notices that she is frequently absent from her workplace, so one day as she returns all wet from the rain outside, Harrison asks her where she has been, as they have no time to waste. Catherine bursts out and tells him that because their office doesn't have any restrooms for colored people, she has to run 800 meters every time that she needs to use the washroom. Further, they are also not allowed to ride bicycles, and she has to run in heels, making it an even more challenging task. She even faces discrimination, as she is not allowed to use the same coffee pot as her coworkers, just because of her skin color. Her speech has a profound impact on Harrison, who removes the signs discriminating against the black people from NASA buildings. The day of NASA's official rocket launch finally arrives, and they make their first successful rocket launch into space. The scientists behind the project are awarded by the president, who plans to continue America's efforts to explore more space, competing against Russia. Later, Mary visits the court, where she tries to convince the judge to allow her to study at the university. The judge seems reluctant to make this bold move, but Mary reminds him that she will be the first black woman ever to achieve this, and he will be remembered as the first judge to allow black people to study at white universities. Her argument convinces him, and he allows her to study at the university. Catherine wishes to work on the calculations for the next rocket launch, but Paul is against this idea, so she asks Harrison who allows it, based on her previous work. After 47 days in space, the astronaut flies back toward Earth, but the rocket can't resist the atmospheric heat and gets damaged while landing. The government feels disappointed and urges Harrison to improve their rocket design. Later on, Catherine calculates the data, but Paul tells her that their data keeps changing, and the information is no longer relevant. She realizes that in order to get the real-time data, she should be there in the meeting, and she asks permission to join them, but he denies her request as only men are part of these meetings. After another rejection, Catherine asks Harrison for his permission, and despite Paul's attempts to stop her, he allows her. At the meeting, astronauts and officials from the government gather, and Harrison reports that they are still working on finding the exact coordinates for the rocket's launch and landing. As they push him for answers, he asks Catherine to do the calculations, and she quickly uses the board and comes up with the exact coordinates for the rocket's launch and landing, impressing everyone. Dorothy continues to try to operate the machine, and soon she becomes successful. However, two officers find her doing this, and they are shocked. The next day, Mitchell asks Dorothy to work in machine operating, but Dorothy says that she will only do this on one condition, that all the other black accountants must also be hired there. Since Mitchell has no choice, she agrees. As Mary starts her studies, the staff gets confused since they never had a black woman there, but she explains that she has been permitted by the judge to study here. Despite all the challenges, she remains firm in her pursuit of her dreams. One day, as Catherine returns from her work, her family prepares a nice feast, and soon after, Jim arrives and proposes to her, which she readily accepts. The next day, Catherine gets the bad news that since NASA's calculating machine is now working, they won't be needing her services, and she is to be moved back to her old office. But before she leaves, Harrison apologizes to her, and they give her a pearl necklace to congratulate her on her engagement with Jim. Later, Catherine gets married to Jim. On February 20th, 1962, NASA made another attempt, and this time their mission will be broadcast live on TV, and they not only plan to fly in space, but orbit the planet 7 times, after which the rocket must successfully return to Earth. But just before the launch, Harrison learns that the data they got from the machine today is not the same as the one they got yesterday. He informs Paul, who also starts looking for the problems. Harrison contacts the astronaut who had witnessed Catherine's calculator skills, so he says they should ask her, and if she says the data is correct, only then will he continue the mission. But if she finds an error, the mission will be aborted. Harrison orders one of his men to go and ask Catherine. He runs towards Catherine's division and realizes how much she had to endure every time she had to relieve herself. Catherine quickly starts working, and after finishing the calculations, she rushes to the station. The staff member enters and closes the door to her face. Catherine is about to leave, but luckily Harrison stops her and asks her to come and see the whole operation with her own eyes. She sees what is happening in the NASA operator room, and Harrison reports to the astronaut that the calculated coordinates match. The astronauts finally start their mission, and the spacecraft is launched into space. After her shift, Dorothy is about to leave, but Mitchell arrives and gives her her official letter appointing her as the new supervisor. They are now equal, and she is no longer Mitchell's subordinate. So as a sign of respect, Mitchell calls Dorothy by her first name. The mission to explore space goes well, until suddenly a light blinks, indicating they must come back fast. They decided to cut the trip short and return after only 3 orbits. But when they try to land, something goes wrong with the Earth's atmosphere, making the rocket extremely hot. The astronaut sees flames outside his window, and then they lose track of the rocket on their radar. NASA keeps trying to contact him, but he doesn't respond. Suddenly, his rocket shows up again on the radar, and everyone feels relieved. Luckily, John landed safely on Earth, exactly where Catherine said he would. Harrison praises Catherine for her good work, which made all of this possible. Mary earned her engineering degree and became the first African-American woman engineer at NASA. Dorothy continued her role as the first African-American supervisor at NASA. Catherine went on to calculate trajectories for important missions like Apollo 11 and the Space Shuttle. Her contributions were recognized, and she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2015. In 2016, NASA dedicated Katherine G. Johnson Computational Building in honor of her groundbreaking work in space travel.